And today, of course, we've organized a panel discussion to discuss some of the ideas that are in the real thing. Most of you have had a chance to see the show. It's in the gallery. It's up until December 2nd. And I just want to briefly introduce our participants. Without further ado, I think we're going to start with Claudia. So please, everybody, welcome Claudia Hart.
And when Michael said to me, you should be part of the Sculptors Guild, at that point I said, no way, I don't make sculpture. But I was wrong. I was totally wrong. I thought, how can I be making sculpture because it's, you know, a movie? And then at that point, I thought I was making a hybrid between painting and film. But I was wrong about that too. And the reason I found out that I was wrong really had to do with the fact that I started teaching it to other artists, young artists, and I had to talk about it and analyze it a lot. And then we started working on this show, and the three of us started to have conversations about what is this medium? What is this that we're doing? And I thought it had to do with painting meets film, because this medium deals with a virtual camera, right? You look into a virtual world through a virtual camera. And Michael, being consistent, he said, no, 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 it's sculpture. And then I realized, I think it's both. And this is an example of a virtual sculpture, meaning it's a movie that I made to be a video object that's dealing with the issue of the moviness and the sculpture-ness of this medium. So what I did was that this is Simon, and it shows this woman, and she's moving slowly, and she is life-size, and the monitors add up to her full body at life-size. It shows 5 key poses that were not literally evoked by Odalisque paintings, but are canonical sleeping naked women poses from Titian and from Raphael and artists like that. And then I very slowly animated her 500 frames from pose to pose, 500 frames of breathing. And she moves forwards and then backwards. So I do every mathematical permutation between those poses. And then I purposely broke her body, so I made it like impossible. A human, you know, your arm, you would be totally broken if you squished someone like that. So I sort of wanted her to be something between Eros, is death, and sex. And everything I do is death and sex. It's also about the uncanny, a sort of living dead representation, something that seems eerily alive and eerily dead at the same time, a living sculpture. And I think a lot of the artists working with this medium play with ideas about the uncanny.
So I actually came to working in 3D almost somewhat by accident, in that I teach in a, unlike Claudia, I actually teach in a very small art department, and I'm the one new media person in my department, and basically needed to sort of fill that a niche for 3D in the program. So I started to learn 3D and I was actually kind of interested to learn, so I took the opportunity because I actually wanted to find out more about it. And as I was starting to learn it, I started to look for resources that were available on artists working in 3D, and I sort of drew a blank. There really wasn't any resources available to really look at what artists were doing. Obviously, the game industry, there's a lot of resources for that kind of work, and entertainment, movies, etc. But actually finding critical practice in 3D was really difficult. Resources, centralized resources, it's the dialogue around that wasn't developed. And one of the things that I've been involved in as a new media artist is also developing the dialogues and discourses around new media. I've actually been involved with the New Media Caucus, as Michael mentioned. Since its very beginning, I was involved, and I founded the journal Media End. And so I just see it as a responsibility, especially in new media, artists who are working in media, that we have to help to create the discourse, because nobody else is going to do it. We know what's happening, nobody else does. So we have a completely different responsibility as artists in this medium than a painter. To make this point of departure was, I actually started to look through the video pieces that I made in the Dream series, and I pulled stills from them, and I cut them up, and I started to recomposite them. reinvention of my work in this sort of more dreamlike, open, possible world that I created here. So, you know, and what I'm interested in here and with this piece is that this female figure, this subject is not entirely there. There's this sort of transparent quality you can see through, and you're reminded constantly it's just kind of, it's there, but it's not really there. It's just a figment of my imagination.
Artists are imitators, they don't actually produce anything, they don't contribute something. And so to call and think about artificial sculpture, and ergo artificial life as well, was a kind of a fruitful and interesting territory for me. These particular pieces, which was the Pudo series, I always had a sculpture with it, and the sculpture was developed out of the animation. Right? So in other words, I learned or realized very early, I started doing this 3D, working in 3D and doing the sculpture part of it, building things with rapid prototyping and so on. And work in a very real way grew out of my response to our political situation. Now, it's not obviously political, right? And I think with this work, this body of work, I really struggle between the formal, on the one hand, and sort of my training as a kind of a conceptual artist with a certain formal influence and all that stuff, and on the other hand, the world events that were just out of control. I felt that they were out of control. Certainly 9/11. See our sort of brainless, headless march to war. Right? And so to me, and at the same time, who was actually in charge? There seemed to be all these hybrid forces at play and so on and so forth. And so I kept getting the hit in my own mind, with my own, you know, headless hybrid creature. And yet at the same time, of course, I was interested in artificial life and artificial intelligence. I was always trying to cram a multiple level of ideas into the layering of works.
I have a fairly traditional studio practice. Did undergrad at Paterson, did a post-baccalaureate degree at Maryland Institute College of Art, and then at Rutgers I did my master's, and that's where I met Michael. So this is a couple images from my thesis about 3 feet to the wall, and it's, you know, drywall and shadow. I like that I get to put shadow on material with. And really quick, as a resident artist here, I use a CNC mill and milled out 2 works for a show in Delaware. I'll just show it. This is about 3.5 feet deep into the wall. For this cavernous.
With that, artists drop the issue of verisimilitude or faking reality because you have the camera, so why bother? And that's when you saw the beginning of modernity and abstraction and the idea that authenticity in art meant you didn't try to represent anything else, you just made a brushstroke on canvas was true because it didn't try to be a picture, it was just what it was. And I think that was the dominant interest in art until what's called post-modernity was the rejection of the modernist idea that this is just this, or and that was why people at that point started looking back. The last time those issues were probably Magritte and realistic surrealism. So the famous painting by Magritte that said, "This is not a pipe. This is just a representation. It's not real." And then postmodernity said, "This is more real. The media is more real. The representation is the most important thing. Media dominates our culture. The most important, powerful thing in our world is mediation." And then what we're doing became relevant.